Hello, welcome to part 4 of the fundamentals of Next.js 14. In this part, we are going to be doing data fetching, rendering, and streaming. So we're going to learn where we can fetch our data in Next.js applications, Next.js 14 specifically, and also we're going to learn about something called a parallel and sequential data fetching in Next.js. We are also going to know what clients components are in Next.js 14 because this is relatively new. It's like there's a new naming convention in Next.js. We have clients components and server components in Next.js 14. We are also going to learn about what streaming is in this section. So this is basically what we're going to be going through in this section. So without wasting much time, let's just get started to it by looking at data fetching. Where can we fetch our data in this Next.js 14? You have the client and the server. On the clients, we have clients components, while on the server, we have server components. Now, don't worry about client component and server components, what they mean now. Now, let's just try to get some data and see where we can start getting that data before we look into what server components are. Server components, just to give you a few of it, is that they run exclusively on the server. While clients components, they can run on the server and on the client also. But the thing is that you cannot fetch data inside. That means like on top of client's component, like inside of client's components. But on the server components, it is possible you just fetch data inside of your server components. But with the client component, you use something like a use effect in order to so that it doesn't cause a side effect in your application to prevent your application from re-rendering. So that is what I'm going to tell you for now. Why we go deeper into the course, you're going to understand more about the client's components and server components. Now, let's talk about data fetching for a little bit. If you look at these two diagrams here, you have the left and the right here. The left here is the server, is the client's component, while on the right here is the server component. Here, I divide this into two. Here, we have the client and the server for this. And if you look at these two components, let's just imagine that these two components. You have the parent and the child component here. The parent component here is this component A, and the child component is this component B. You see that these two components, they are managing their own data. They are fetching their own data. Now, this can be good. This is actually good because they get to control their own data. But the problem here is that you're going to be sending too many requests to the server, to our database, in order to get that specific data. Imagine that you have like nested 10 different components nested into each other, and they're all fetching data from the database in order to display that single page. You see that we are sending too many requests at once, back and forth, right to our database, to our server. Because actually, whenever we are crossing the client boundary to the server, an HTTP request is going to be sent. So we are putting a lot of burden on the server. So this even causes a situation on itself, which is known as client server waterfall. It creates a waterfall because of this too much requests which have been sent to the server here. So a request waterfall mostly happen when data is being fetched sequentially. That means the previous this component. Let's take for the instance of this component A and component B. That means component A, that is the component 1, is going to finish rendering, fetching its data. Sorry, not rendering. Component 1 is going to finish fetching its data before component 2 can start fetching its own data. So you see that component 2 is dependent on component 1 to finish rendering its data before it can continue fetching its own data. So it is like in a sequence. That's why it creates that situation of a request waterfall. Now, this can be something that your application needs. Actually, it's not necessarily bad. It is something that your application needs. So if it is something that your application needs, it's actually okay. But in other cases, it can be an error, which is not what you actually want, but it is going to slow down your application. Why so? Let's say you have like 5 or 6 components doing the same thing. That means the last component down the tree is going to wait until the 5 other components have finished fetching their own data. So we see that there's a long wait time of doing nothing, just waiting for the data to fetch. So this affects performance of that page or of the application. So let's just head over to the Next.js documentation and see what the sequential data fetching and parallel data fetching is all about. So here I will go to my browser here. Okay, this is our application. Let's go to, I'll open a new tab here. Okay, we already have a Next.js tab here. This is it. And let's go to data fetching. I'll go to, okay, this is data fetching. Let's come to data fetching patterns and best practices. Scroll down. Okay, we have streaming here. We're going to talk about streaming later. And here we have parallel and sequential data fetching. Now, when fetching data inside React components, you need to be aware of two data fetching patterns. Okay, you see what I was talking about? This is a sequential data fetching. Look at this here. You see the root layout is fetching its own data. This will start fetching, all this will start fetching at once. But if one of these components here is slower, until these components finish here before the dashboard component can begin fetching its own data. The same with the settings page. Until this dashboard layout fetches its own data before the setting page can continue. You see the time it takes to fetch this data is longer. But with parallel fetching, all of these data requests are being initiated at once. So that is mainly the difference between the parallel and the sequential data fetching patterns. Here they say requests in routes are eagerly initiated and will load data at the same time. This reduces client-server waterfall and the total time it takes to load the data. So this is like a solution, not really a solution, but because it doesn't completely eliminate the client server request waterfall situation, but it kind of prevents it a little. So how you see, this is the way, this is an example here. You see, you're fetching, if you're getting some data from here, you say get artist playlist. Here you see you are getting the artist playlist from this component here, and if you get into this component here, you're getting the artist here. You see, these two components are going to be fetched in sequence. That's until this get playlist finish before this get artist playlist finish before the get artist can continue, because this can be because this get artist, it needs to use the username from the get artist playlist data fetching result. So it must wait for this to finish before this can before the get artist can continue. In that situation, this is actually good for you. But if this was unintentional, you didn't need to depend on this. This is going to be a problem for your application. Now, you see, this is now the parallel data fetching. This is the situation for the parallel data fetching here, and you can see that the data here is being fetched here. Fetched. This is get artist and get artist album here, but here they're using a promise to aggregate all of that data fetching at once. So the data is going to be fetched all together at once, so thereby reducing the time it takes to contact the server, that means to fetch the data, because the data are going to be eagerly fetched from the database. So that is mainly what the sequential and parallel data fetching is all about. So you can go ahead and read this page here to give you more insight on Next.js fetching. So let's go back to our slides. Let me show you. So that is it about client's component. You see that it has some problems, and it creates some problems when you're fetching data on the client. Now, this doesn't mean that in Next.js 14 we don't have to fetch data on the client. Yes, you can, depending on the use case. Yes, if you can, depend on the use case, but try as much as possible to fetch your data on the server, because one, the server, it doesn't server component specifically. I'll be just using server. When I talk about server, just understand that it's going to be the server components, because on server components they do not re-render. Server components do not re-render. Therefore, the possibilities for that client site for client server waterfall request are limited. It's difficult for it to happen, but that doesn't mean it cannot happen, because if you're fetching our data also like parallel, it can also create that situation. You might be thinking here in this client component that, okay, why not fetch the data for this children component right inside the client, the parent component here, this component one? Yes, that is actually possible, but the thing is that we are going to make our components tied to each other, which is going to be very difficult in order to maintain this, to maintain it, and also it might cause a lot of problems, like a lot of re-rendering when we make a little mistake. So our components are going to be re-rendering that much, which is not necessary actually. So you see, it has a couple of problems here. But when you're coming to the server component here, look at the server component here. You see that there is only a one round trip request to the server here, and all the components are being fetched on the server. Now, there are some benefits here. You see that the components are actually close to the data source. That means they can get the data directly from the server here. They can from the database here. They can contact the database directly, get the data, and just send to the client. No more back and forth crossing the client boundary, sending HTTP request and getting the data back and forth. So only one request has been sent, and the data has been fetched and is sent to the client. You see, as you can see from this diagram, the server components are actually runs on the server, which means they're close to the data source. So as I told you before, so this also is advantageous, especially you see during situations like initial render, because doing initial render with client's components, or let's say in the native way, in React native way of doing things, when your components are being rendered, we just see a white blank screen, right? But it's different from like Next.js where they do pre-rendering, or during build, our HTML is being generated on the server. Or HTML is being generated on the server. Now with server components, when that HTML is being generated from the server, the data, the initial data for that component can be fetched directly during that build time. So you see that we can even have information about our application before the application even actually loads. So it is very good to use server components in order to fetch your data. So, and that is what we're going to be doing in this video, and it's even recommended in the Next.js documentation. So you should try as much as possible to use server components to fetch your data. Yes, based on the numerous reasons which I've just listed to you now. So with this now, you see, we are going to, let's go to our code and see how we can use Prisma in order to fetch our data. So we are here in application. Let me go here. Okay, this is it. This is where we stopped here. There's a page file here. We built our static page for the dashboard. We built a static page for the dashboard. Now, what I want us to do is I'm going to clear all of this up here. Say Control W. Let's go to our folder here, and SQLite Explorer. I want to minimize it like this, yeah. And we are going to be writing our database queries in this Prisma file here. So we already have the instance of the Prisma here. We already have Prisma instance here. So we're going to be writing everything in this Prisma file here. So let's start by creating our last 5 orders here. I'll say export. It's going to be export async function get last 5 orders. Also try catch. I also wrap this in a try catch block here, and in this catch block, what I'm going to do is I'll just lock the console for now, and also I'm going to throw the error, a new error. Now if you throw a new error, what will happen is that the suspend boundaries, the closest suspend boundaries of where you are calling this function is going to be able to catch this error. So we have not talked about errors yet, but we're going to talk about it, so you're going to understand why we are throwing this error here. For now, just bear with me and let's do it like that. So I'm going to return await prisma.order.find many, because we're going to be finding many orders, and I'll just order by, I want this order by the updated at timestamp, and it's going to be descending here. And it also takes another option here, which is to take, we can say take only 5 items here, like this. Now with this, see, we have our function to get the last 5 orders. This is going to get our last 5 orders for us here, this function. So if we close it now, so how are we going to be using this? Because this, as I told you, every component which you write in Next.js 14 is going to be a server component. That means we are fetching this data here on the server. Since we are fetching this data on the server, we need to call it. And if we're calling this data on the server here, then it is good, because everything is going to be executed on the server here. So let's go to where we need this data. We need this in our dashboard here, in this pages folder here. Let me see, this is latest orders. So I'll go into the latest orders component here, F12. Now here, this is where I'm going to call this get latest order, because this is where we need it inside this component here. And this component here is also a server component. That means we are fetching this data on the server here. I'm going to just say const latest orders. Now I'm going to delete this other latest orders we have here. It's going to give us an error, but we have our data already. I say get last 5 orders. It doesn't require any parameter, so we can skip it. Yes. Now the thing is that you see that this is here. See, we are fetching data right into a component. Before, this was not, this couldn't happen here. Before, you couldn't fetch data like this without putting up a use effect here, without putting on the use effect here. So we cannot use a use effect here because this again is a server component. We're going to look at those what you can do and what you cannot do with server components a bit later. So here we are calling the data, but what we need to do is we can await it here. We can await it here. You see, we are awaiting it here. That means we need to make this function here an asynchronous function. So async. Wow, components have been having asynchronous functions here. Wow, this is great. You see, we are getting the last 5 orders here. Let's log it to the console now. CLJ, and let's say last 5 orders. Okay, you see, we have them here. These are all the orders here. If you go back to our database now, to our application, you will see that nothing has changed. We still have our orders here. It's just that the order in which they appear is not going to be the same here. They appear according to the time in which they were created, updated. If you look here, December 15, this is where I scaffolded this product, this demo product here. So you see, we are already getting our data here. So let's go and continue. Let's get more data for everything we have here. Let's get the data, except for this chart. We are going to work on this chart. Also, you're going to work on this chart now. Yes. So let's get the data for everything we have here before we can continue, before we can look at what server side, what server components are and what client components are. So let's go back to here. Yeah, this is our code. So I'm going to remove this for now. Here, let's go to the Prisma. Let's go to Prisma folder here. Let's create the other let's fetch the other data here. Now let's also get the users. So this is going to be export async function get. I'll just call them users because we have 4 users in the database. So this is going to be try catch. Here, I'll lock the user for now. We're going to remove these locks altogether, and here we'll just throw an error. So get error getting users, and here I just want to return await Prisma find Prisma.users.find many. Now we have our users. Now let's also get our cat data. Let's go get our cat data. So I'll say export async function get cat data. Oh yes. Now here, yes, we're going to throw the error as usual, but here we need to get the cat data. And the cat data, how are we going to do this here? We are going to be using the Prisma aggregation methods in order to try to calculate the users data with their orders. So we're going to use the Prisma aggregation methods. Now the thing with the Prisma aggregation methods is that it's not like really fully function. It doesn't have the full functionality like if you're working with MongoDB, or if you're using SQL statements, you write those aggregation yourself. You have full control. But with Prisma, it doesn't really give you all the options in order to structure your data or change your data the way you want. So we are just going to use a few of what they have to offer for us for now. They're still working on it, and we can use JavaScript now to manipulate the other part. So what I'm going to do is, instead of Prisma.cat here, we're going to say order here dot group by, go by, you see, it's just like the MongoDB operator, but the MongoDB has way more stuff than this one here. So group by here, we have this by the first parameter here. We're going to have to group them by their status here, and also, oh, what is this? This is status, and here I also want to group them by the user's ID here. Now, if you come to count here, what this will do is that it's going to group all of this by the user status here, and it's going to count the total number of items we have based on this user status, and the user ID here. That's why we're having this count here. So what do we want to count by? We only want to count by the status here, and we set the status to true. Now this is going to give us an array of data which we can loop over the array. So what I'll do here is I'll use JavaScript in order to manipulate the result of this order here. So let me log it to the console, and you see, let's just see here. Let me go and call this function in the in our pages here. Let me just call it in pages folder here, so that we see. I'll say let's say get data. Did we call it cut data? Yes, get cut data, like this. And so we're going to make this an asynchronous, this dashboard asynchronous, async here, and here we also need to await the call, await here. Let's just say clg. Let's bring all of this here. Okay, you see, it's giving us an array. Let me put this here like this. Let me remove this, not a breakpoint. Okay, you see, this is the data. This is the format in which it has given us this data. We have this underscore count, we have status delivered here, we have then the user ID here. Now this is the user ID. We're going to group it according to the user's ID here. We have this user, this here we are counting this according to the delivered product here, and here we are counting this according to the products on the way, and here we are counting this according to the products that are pending. So if you look for this user has 3 products that are pending, and this user 2 here, they have 1 product that is pending, and user 3 here have 2 product that is pending. So you see, it is grouping according to the user's ID and according to the status here. So, and these are the counts here. So we're just going to try to make this data in a way that we can use in our chart, because we want this data to resemble the data that is going to be used with rechart here. So if you come to rechart, let's go to where did we have that rechart? Let's come to chat. This is it here, order chart. Yeah, okay. We need the data to be in this format here, like this. So that is why we're going to use JavaScript in order to structure the data to be in this format. So let's go back to our Prisma here. I hope that one was clear. So here I'm going to say const here. Instead of returning, I'm not going to be returning from this function now, just now. I'll say const, I'll store this in a chat data. Say chat data. This is chat data. Okay, this also here is chat. It's not cat here. This is supposed to be chat. Sorry guys, this is chat data. So here it's going to throw us an error because we don't have such a data there. So I'm just going to remove this for now. Remove this. So let's come back here. This is chat data. Get chat data. Yes. Now what I want to do is I'll use the reduce method on this chat data. I'll log this chat data to the console, and you saw it. So we are going to use the return method here. I'll say const transform is transformed data is going to be chat data dot, instead of map here, we're going to have a reduce here, reduce. I want to use the reduce function here, and this reduce function is going to take you have the item here, which is, I'll just call this result instead of item, result here of any, and item instead, yes, item here of any. So if you come here, I'll say const status is equals to item dot status dot to lowercase. So I'm just converting the status here to lowercase, yes, so that it should be uniform. Yes, we should have some uniformity there. So it's a const existing entry here is equals to result dot find. So what are we going to find for each entry here? This is going to be of type any. We want to set entry dot, this is not going to be status, user id is equals to item dot user id, item dot user id. I'm going to explain this to you, so don't worry too much. So what we are doing here is, first we are getting the status here of the product, right? And here we are getting the existing entry, because you know with the reduce function here, this reduce it takes an accumulator and the current item which we are working with, and this result here is the accumulator, is that accumulator, and this item is the current item which you are working with. So here we are getting the existing entry by saying result.find, because here if we already have an item here, then this method is going to return us that item, that existing item here. So that's why we are looping, we are finding the item in this accumulator here. So that's it, checking the existing items here. Now if we have now that existing item, we need to check if existing entry, let me see if this code here, this is being auto completed for us. Let's see if it is correct. This here is not correct, so we're just going to say if this existing entry of status want to get back that very existing entry here. Oh, this is status, yes, like this, or zero. If we have the existing entries or it is zero, then you want to add the item dot count, the number of status count to this existing item. So that's what we are doing here. We just add the number of count items to the existing entry there. So here I'll just put a plus here, okay, like this. Here this is now good. If you have existing entry, you add the status count to that existing entry. So that is what happened in this if block here. Now coming to the else block now here, if we do not have existing entry, that means we need to create one and we push the result into that and we push that entry into the result field here, into this accumulator, because remember this accumulator here is the result. So I'm going to, this totally here is wrong, I will not do it like that. So what I'll do is I'll say const entry, and let's just say the entry is of type any. We need to first give the type explicitly here, and so user id, which is item dot user id here. I'll say entry dot status is equals to item dot count dot status. Then now we can just say result dot push. We now push the entry right into this result. Now with this, this is not yet done yet, because here we are using this reduce method here. On the first iteration of this reduce method, we want it to be an array. So I'll just say, I'll put square brackets here, and now we can return this result from here. Let's return the result from this operation here. We need to return the result from here. So here I'll just say return a result, yes. And if we are returning the result now, then we have our transform data here. This is transform data, and here let's also return the transform data. So I'll say return transform data. Now if you go to our page here, let's call back that let's call back our, this also calls chat data is equals to get chat data. We don't need this http get here. We want to get the chat data like this. Now let's lock it. Let's say chat data. Okay, it's a promise. We need to await it here. Okay, now the result is actually in the way we want it to be. You see, here we have it like this. Yes, it's an array which is divided into these two users here. It's divided within these three users. Sorry, we have user 1, user 2, user 3, and user 4. Four users. You see, the 4 users have only one. Delivered is 1, and the third user have delivered 2, on the way 1, pending 2. So just like that. Now, I think this we are done with that one. Now, there's one more data which we need to get here. So here, export async function get card data. Okay, this is our card data. Now you're wondering why I'm getting this card data. This card data is the count of the number of items which we have for that data. Now the thing is that what we could have done is we could use JavaScript just to get the length of our total items in the database, our total orders, our total users, and our total orders on the way. Could have used JavaScript to get the length of those, but since we are using relational database here, and SQL, when you're writing SQL statement, it's kind of fast, and we are using Prisma, which is going to generate those SQL statements for us. And so you see that it's better we just count all of those things on the database itself rather than using JavaScript. So we are just going to get the data from the database itself. We're going to query the database directly. So here I'm going to say try catch here, and just for now let's lock the error so that if we get any problem we can fix it earlier. Now I'll first a const here, number of order delivered. This is the delivered orders here. Let me give some more space here. Okay, so I'll say await Prisma dot order dot count, where you see how easy it is with Prisma, where status is equals to delivered, like this. Now there's no interlicense for you here, so you need to make sure you type this correctly because we're in the context of a string here. So you need to make sure you type this correctly. We could have used an enum when we're modeling our database for this status. Yes, that was a mistake. If you wanted to get IntelliSense, we could have used an enum for that, but it's okay. So we have the number of orders delivered. The second here is going to be number of orders in transit. Const number of orders in transit, which is orders on the way, right? So await Prisma where status is equals to here. Now the status here is when a status is a transit, is we called it's on the way. I think so, on the way. Yes, like this. And now there is another thing which you can do here. Since we know that we have delivered, on the way, and is pending, what you could also done here is, instead of this on the way, that's just a second solution. If you don't want to write that string like that on the way like that, you could also say not. There's another method here, not in, which is going to show that it's going to look if this status is not in this two status here, then it's going to return the number of count there. So let's just say not in here, delivered and pending. Put an array here. So any status that is not within this status is going to return the number of status in transit. You can do it like this, or you can do it the other way. Yes. So const number of status pending. Yes. Here now we just say the status is equals to pending, and we are done here. And we can just return here all the orders here. We have number of status delivered, number of status in transit, and number of orders. Number of orders delivered, number of orders in transit, and number of orders pending. They are going to be here. So with this, we get our cat data. So let's see if we can get the cat data here. Let's come here instead of chat data here. I'm going to say cat data. Also write chat data instead of cat data here. So let's say instead of chat data here, say get cat data and get cat data, and let's lock the cat data here. Okay, you see, these are them here. You have number of ordered delivered is 8, number of ordered in transit is 6, and number of ordered pending is 6. So the total order to have in the database are 20. So if you sum them up, you see they are it's matching actually. So here we have all the orders to fit in our dashboard. So let's just go and fit them before we continue. So what I'll do is, let me just get rid of this for now, because let's see our cat. Okay, we already have our cat here and we have our cat data here. So what we can do is, let's just destructure all of this from the cat data here. Let's destructure the number of ordered delivered and the number of ordered in transit with the ordered pending. So now instead of these values here, we had coded these values here. I'm just going to replace this value with, here is going to be cat data dot number of orders. This is pending here, and here this one is for on the way, which is in transit. So cat data dot number of order in transit. Then the last one is for delivered. Here it's going to be cat data dot number of order delivered. Okay, this is, now we have replaced this data. So we need, which other data do we need to replace? The users. So let's go to user, Control P, they'll say order users, say users, dash users. Okay, this is it. Here, instead of getting the user form, here we are going to get the dash users from, I need to first make this an asynchronous function, and here we just called get users, and we await it here, and we have our users. Now it is left only this chart here. Since this chart here is a client component, we cannot use that function, that server function directly here inside this client component. We cannot fetch the data directly inside this client component, because for now the client component is not an asynchronous. We cannot make it an asynchronous component here. So let's just first go check the data first and see if we don't have any problems. Yeah, so we see everything is still the same here. Pending here is 6, on the way is 6, and deliver here is 8. Now these reviews, I told you this review here is just for showcase. We don't have the data for reviews here, but I didn't want to leave this space empty. Or you can easily put the total, we can easily put the total number of products in the database, which is 20 here, in the place of the reviews here. Yes, that's something we can also do. Now let's focus our attention to this chat section now, guys. Let's focus our attention to this chat section here. You can see here, let's go back to the code here. Now you see that this other chart here is a client component. Here is a client component. So that raises the question to whether are we going to be using this function, this method which we create to get our data here, this get chat data here, are we going to call it directly in the client component? Can we call this method directly in the client component here? So the answer is no for now. You cannot like call this client function directly inside this server function directly inside the client's component here. It's not going to work at the moment, but I heard React, the team is actually working on a workaround for that. But what we can do is, since this is close to our server, since this function is being imported into a server function here, we can call this method in our page.css and pass it down as prop here. So let's go and call this chat data here in page.txt here. So what I mean by that is, I'll remove this. Let's also get is cat data here. Let's get chat data, the second one, and I'll say const chat data is get chart data. Now let's come to where we have our chart here. Let's just pass the chart data here. Let's say chart data is equals to chart data. So you see that the reason why this is going to work is because now Next.js, they have this React server components is going to hold the value for this prop. Yes, the React server component payload is going to hold the value for this prop here. So it's able to pass whatever we pass here from the server to the client. So it's going to know how to pass this value to the client component here. All the props here are being held in the React server component payload. Now let's go and get this this chart data from our other chart. So I'll just go into this method here and I'll get it here. Chart data is throwing us an error here because we need us to give a type. Now we can create a type for this, or what you can say any here is just going to work the way of JavaScript. If you just say any here, we're not going to have any type safety of any kind. So but if you want to provide the types for this here, so you can provide type like this. I'll say here this is chart data is of type, this is an array, and inside this array we have objects where the number the first is going to be, let's say, pending is a number, delivered is a number, on the way this is on the way here is like this, yes, it's a number, and we have user ID here, which is also a number. So now we have the type for this chart here right inside this method here now. So what we can do now is, instead of data here, we just need to substitute the values here inside this component here. And there is something also, let me see. Okay, yes, we have the chart data here now. And the first thing I'm going to do is we need to change this data property here. We are passing data here, so this is simply going to be chart data like this. It's expecting an array, and let's come to X. This data key here is going to be, instead, our user ID here is going to be string user ID. It's going to know how to get that user ID. And we also need to change some few things. Let's see, the stroke here, yes, it's okay. Let's come to this brush here. This data key for the brush is going to be the user ID here, and the stroke here is okay. Now let's come to the bars here. The bars here, the data key is not going to be this one, this PV here. The first is going to be, let's say, on the way here is going to be this color here, and this second one here is going to be, let's say, delivered is going to be this color here. Now for delivered, I want to give the color of our status, our delivered status. So I'm going to paste the color here. I'll paste this color to be the color of our delivered status. And also we need another bar here for pending. So this is going to be pending. It's a pending here, and I'm going to copy the color for this pending here. Also we need to change the color for this pending. We'll paste it here. So we have it like this. With this now, we have our chart data here. Let's go and check. Okay, you see we have the chart data here. We have on the way, delivering, pending here. So you can see how it's nicely partitioned here. You see here is the first user. The first user have 2 products on the way. Delivered is 3. Pending here is 3. Here the same here. The second user have 3 products on the way, 2 delivered, 1 pending. Here this last user here, they have only delivered product. They have ordered only 1 product and it's delivered. So this is what our dashboard is showing. It's not much, but it's enough for you to learn Next.js. So I think, yes, I know a lot of people have been asking questions of why I didn't provide a dashboard for the last project which we built, the Bokang e-market environment. Yes, hopefully I'm going to answer your request. I'm going to try to provide a dashboard for that project, for that Bokang application, and also for subsequent applications which we're going to be building. So And I think for dashboard, it's not really that difficult. So you can do it, but I'm also going to provide the dashboard for that program application very soon for those who need it. So with this dashboard section is finished. It's finished here. Now let's go back to our application. What about a case? Because now we are getting our data just from our server components, which is actually great. But what about a situation where you need to implement an API in Next.js 14? For example, let's say you want to do something like a webhook, which needs you to implement an API that we use to call it in the front end, or you're working with an external yes, you're working with a package that requires you to need an API endpoint. So how can you do that with Next.js here? So let's just go and explore how to create an API endpoint, how you will create an API endpoint in Next.js 14. So I'll go back to the code here. So we are here now. Let's go to, so in order for you to create an API in Next.js, what you do is you can come to, we have this dashboard here. We have pages here. You can create a new folder here called layout. But the thing is that if you create this layout folder directly, if it's on the same route with your page.txs file, it's going to throw an error because they will have the same route segment, which is not allowed. So in order to do that, your page.txs file doesn't have to be on the same route as your route.txt file. Yes. So what we can do is here we'll come. I have this API folder here. I create this API folder here. We can write our API inside this API folder here. We'll just create a new file in this API folder and I'll call it route.ts here. Now with this route.ts here, Next.js is going to treat this folder as our API environment. It's going to be an API endpoint for us. So here, what you can do here is I can just say export async function here, and I'll call this is going to be get. This and in this get function here, you can either decide to put a response there or not. Here, I want to just get our number of our orders here. Since we already have a function for it, you can just call that get orders inside here and you return it as a JSON here. So you can say here that await Prisma dot users dot find many, and it's going to give you all the users there. And here, let's just return let's say const users, and now you say JSON, you say response.json, because here when you are in this route handler here, you have the response object available to you here. So you can say a response here dot JSON, and you just pass the users in here. So you see this here is just going to create us an API endpoint that will point to this direction. It will go to a place like this. So if you go to this API endpoint like http localhost 3000 API/dashboard, you're going to get all our users on this endpoint here. So if you go to this endpoint, you're going to get all our users here. So if you're implementing something like a webhook, we are not going to be using this in this application. So I just thought I showed you. So if you are implementing something like a webhook and you need to call it your client's application, so you can do it normally like this. This is how you do it. It's just the same thing which you do it with maybe an Express API or something. Yeah. So if you copy this, let's copy this and go to our browser and see if we can get some data from here. Or open a new tab here, and I'll just paste it here. Let's hit. Okay, they say this page could not be found. So localhost API/dashboard. Okay, it's a dashboard/API. So I'll cut this in here like this. Okay, this page isn't working. Localhost is currently unable to handle the request here. Okay, that means it's working, but it showed us an error. So let's see what we are doing wrong. down there, we are missing a return statement here. So here we need to return. So if you go back and try, I think you're going to get the data now. Let's reload. Yes, you see this, we have our data here, we have the users here, these are all the users here. So you see now that you can have an API endpoint also right into Next.js. See, so you can use this API endpoint now to do your, whether you are doing authentication, you can also, with authentication you can also provide an API endpoint here. So with this, I think we are wrapping up with this part for data fetching. There's a lot about data fetching, so like caching and all of that. So I'll advise you to read the documentation in order to learn more about that. So I can't cover everything that I read from the documentation here. So I'll advise you to also take a look at the documentation and see what you can cover for your own self here. So with this, let's go back and recap on something before we close this data fetching and move on to rendering. So from what you've learned with data fetching is that you should try as much as possible to fetch your data on the server, except it's actually necessary for you to fetch your data on the client. And also, you are doing that because on the server you have direct resources. You have direct contact with the server resources like the database here. And also, one important thing when you are fetching the data on the server is that, especially with server components, is that your API keys are being protected. You cannot they are not being leaked to the client's component. So, and also you can perform multiple data fetches by just sending one round trip request, like here from the server to the client. So, and also when you're fetching data with server component, it reduces request waterfall, client server request waterfalls. So all of this here we've talked about is enough for you to begin fetching your own data in your own application. Now let's go to let's talk about rendering in Next.js. Let's talk about rendering now in Next.js. So rendering in Next.js also takes like two forms. We have client components and also we have server components. Here you can render on the client and we can render on the server. Now client component run on both the server and the client, while server components only run on the server. Here the server components only run on the server. So on the server, rendering can be further divided into two. You can render into two. Actually there's one, but it's not included here. It's going to have its own section just because of the way which we're going to be writing our code. We have static and dynamic rendering. So with static rendering is like, if you used to put Next.js, previous Next.js, you're used to static site generation. That is just the way static rendering is working right now. So when you build your application, during build time, when you build your application, so that build file is going to be cached, right? And it's going to be pushed to a CDN here. So from the CDN now, that web page can then be served to your computer, and every other user is going to see that exact same content. That's because it's been cached. That's the default way of Next.js treating pages. So everything is going to be static. So that is static rendering. So how is this useful? It's useful when you have routes which are not personalized to, when you have routes or data not personalized to some particular users. In that way, all the users can receive the same content. Yes, through that CDN. So information about the route also should be known at the build time. So when you know information about that route at build time, then you can statically generate that route. So now what about then a dynamic route? So the main difference between static and dynamic route is the time in which they occur. So static is mostly at build time or during revalidation. Specifically, you can during time revalidation. While dynamic rendering, it mostly occurs when at the request time. So because at the request time you already have information about that particular route, so you can dynamically generate the that page at that time. So also the routes that have data personalized to users, you can dynamically render it that way. So now when your application is building, or when you're rendering your application, so how do Next.js know? Are you going to specify that this route here is dynamic and this route is not dynamic? No. The way you write your code, Next.js is going to choose the right rendering strategy for you. yes, Next.js will going to choose the right rendering strategy for you, depending on how you have written your code. So now it's a matter of you knowing what you are doing and knowing when to cache your data and when not to cache your data. For example, if you have if you have dynamic functions in your data which are being returned, for example, you're using cookies, like when we just talked about there in route handlers. If you're using like cookie, the request object, you're getting the cookie function to get cookies, to read cookies, and also the header function. Also, search parameters. If you're using search parameters, now that route, those information are only known at a request time. That information cannot be known at build time. So in that way, that route is going to be dynamically rendered. So because that information is available only at a request time. So you see that the way you return your information, also if you return cached data here, so the way you write your code, Next.js is going to automatically choose that right rendering strategy for you. So coming to client components here, you see um we have initial page load and subsequent request here. Now, what is this? With client rendering, that doesn't mean that with client rendering, when it comes to the page load, when the page first load, it's going to go through this process, this exact process here for static rendering. So it's going to build our application and catch the application and push it to a CDN, and we're going to see that page. That is, we're going to see the actual content of the page because it was built on the client, on the server. Sorry, the HTML was built on the server and it was sent to our browsers. So we are able to see actual content. But while in something like in plain React, when our application is building, we don't see content ahead of time. That's because only an empty HTML is being served to us. But with Next.js, that HTML is being built at build time. So it's being built right in the server at build time. So we are able to actually see some real content. And that is the same thing with client component in React in Next.js. We are going to be able to see also content. But is that on subsequent requests? That's when the page loads. That happens on page load. But now on subsequent requests here, we are not going to generate the HTML on the server. Again, it's going to be generated right in the client here. So it's going to work normally as the React way. So you generate the HTML on the client, it's going to download the HTML and it's going to pass it, download the JavaScript files, and pass it, all of that. So you're going to wait again. So that is client-side rendering. So with this, with client-side rendering, you see that there's interactivity. If you are using use effect, use state, and event listeners, you have immediate feedback. But with server rendering, you don't really see that interactivity until that component is being hydrated on the client. So when you want to use browser's API, so also client-side rendering is good, or client component, where you're rendering in client component is good because you'll be able to interact with browser's APIs. Like let's say you want to get the location of a user, you can use browser's geolocation, and also you can use local storage, yes, inside client components. So this is just an overview of rendering on the server and rendering on the client. So now, when you are rendering on the server, you use server components, right? When you are rendering inside with on the server, you use server components. Now let's look at some of the advantages of using rendering in server components here. So let's come here. You have benefits of server components. You have data fetching. It improves performance by reducing the time it takes to fetch data and render. Therefore, it reduces the number of client requests. We talked about this during the data fetching illustration. You say that when you fetch your data in server components, it's going to reduce the time it takes for the request to be made. So the next is we have security. Server components allows you to keep sensitive data and logic on the server, like your tokens, your API keys, yes, and also caching. Results are being cached and used on subsequent requests across users. So when you're working on the server, like on server components, your results are going to be cached automatically. That's the default behavior of server components. The results are going to be cached. So you can decide now to opt out of the caching. So if you opt out of caching, that means that component is going to be dynamically rendered. It's not going to be statically rendered again. It's going to be dynamically rendered. So yeah. So the next is going to be, you have bundle size. The bundle size also obviously is going to reduce. So it reduces client JavaScript bundle size by keeping large dependencies on the server. Now, this is very important. I think this is one of the main reasons why we should use server component for rendering. We should try to render as much as we can with server component, but don't overdo it. If I'm to say this, I'll say you should render as much as you can with server component, but you should not overdo it, because now when your applications were being built with server-side rendering, but at the end of the day, the client is going to still download that JavaScript and send to our browsers. But with server components, it's not the same. All every thing you write in server component, everything you write in server components is going to remain, is going to be built and rendered on the server. Nothing is going to be sent on the client. So you see that the amount of client, the JavaScript bundle which is supposed to be kept on the client is going to reduce. So that is the this is one of the main reasons why server components are actually good. So because it reduces the JavaScript bundle size. Next, we have initial page load. So initial page load is faster since HTML is generated on the server. Page view is almost immediately. So it's almost immediate. So this also is very important because this page view is immediate. And it's not only that, we also have real data working with, if you're working with server components, because data is going to be fetched right before this HTML even gets generated on the server, because it's a server component. It doesn't re-render and it doesn't change. That means when your application is building, it has that ability to even get your data. So you're able to even see some real data from the database when doing initial build, when your first page, when your application first loads. So here we have search engine optimization and social network shareable links. It's also improved in SEO. SEO stands for search engine optimization. So browsers are able to index your page very well because the content, a majority of the content is generated on the server, which is very good for search engine optimization. And we have it splits your rendered work into chunks and progressively load these chunks as they become ready. Now this is streaming. So you see that it splits your work into smaller chunks. This can be your route chunks or the components themselves, and it's going to serve these components to you as they become ready. You don't have to wait for one component to finish before the other, or you can render the component as they become ready. So this even reduce the chance of error, making errors in your application, because if an error occurs in one component, you can work with the other pages. Yes, if we have an error in one page, the other pages are still going to be working. So those are one of the main benefits of using server components here. So these are some keynotes about server components. So keynotes about server components. Now, after everything I've said, if there is something you want to remember these 5 points here. It's going to help you a lot when you're working with server components. They're very straightforward. So the first thing is that you should note that server components do not re-render. And as I explained before, it makes a lot of sense because that's why you cannot put a use effect or use state inside these components. They are like static, they run only on the server. They do not re-render. So the next is wrap third-party components that rely on client-only features in your own components. We're going to take a look at this point in our code very soon. The thing here is that if you have a third-party component that, let's say you import a component from a third-party library and you are importing it inside a server component, it's going to show you an error. Let's just say for Material UI that uses client component and it doesn't have any knowledge whether we are going to be using that component on the server, and it is using client features in that component. So Next.js is going to show us an error that we are using a client component in the server component. So it's going to show us an error that because we cannot do that, we cannot run that client specific code inside the server component. In that way, what you can do is you can instead to wrap that third-party component inside a client inside its own client component by importing the use client directive at the top of the file. So when you import the use client directive at the top of file, now you can now import the client component into a server component. In that way, now it's going to work properly. Now we're going to look at this very soon, and you can also move your client components down the component tree to reduce the JavaScript bundle size. I told you about this. So these are the main things you should remember about server components. So you should try to move your client components down the component tree to reduce the JavaScript bundle size. Also, note that server components are rendered first before client components. even those nested inside client components. So this here is very important. So client components are server components are always going to be rendered first before client components. Last but not the least thing which you need to remember from this lecture here is that you cannot import a server component into a client component module, since it will require a new request back to the server. Now, what this is simply saying is that you cannot build you cannot compile a client component as part of a server component. It's going to throw you an error. So, but what you can do is you can pass the server components to the client component as a child, as a prop. Yes, you can receive it as a prop, which is going to be a child of that component. So let's go and see how we can adjust our code here. But first, let's see the why we need to make our dashboard dynamic, because we're going to be making our dashboard dynamic. So if we come back to our application, let's go to tracker here. Now, here everything is static. Now, if you build this application now, you are not going to see it now because we're in the development environment. But now, if you build this application, everything in this application is going to be static. Here, it's going to be statically rendered. Now, this is the default behavior, but we do not want this. This is our dashboard. This is where we need to get an updated information. We need to get all this updated information whenever a new product is created, whenever a new order is made. We need to see this spending increased. Whenever a product is changed from the store to deliver, that means it's on the way. We need to see this number also change. We also need to see the latest orders change. We also need to see users change if a user was added. Also, we need to see this chat section change. All of this is dynamic, but right now it's static because we haven't done anything with it. This is the default way in which Next.js is going to treat all of this. So we now have to go and look at some of the things we talked about here. So let's go to our code and begin to fix that situation. So if we come here to our Prisma folder here, now for us to control our caching behavior, we are going to import and we are going to import something from Next.js here. Let's say import unstable. This is unstable no store. Now it's unstable no store as, I'll just say as store here. Okay, we're calling it no store here. I'll just say no store here. Now this is an API which is which Next.js is using, yes, to control our cache. So we can import it here. You get it from next cache. Now we can use it now to control if our return data is going to be cached or not. Yes, we can use it to control if our return data is going to be cached or not. But before we do that, there is also something. I told you this before, that if we have a data that's been cached, it's going to be dynamic. That means that route is going to be dynamic. But if you have data that is not cached, it's going to be static. So here in our application, that doesn't mean that on a particular route we cannot have both a cached and uncached data. On a route we can have a data that's been cached, and another route we can have a data that is actually cached. But the thing is that if you have a cached data and an uncached data, that route is still going to be dynamically rendered because it has a cached data. So dynamic render is going to take precedence over there. So for a route to be static, it must not contain a dynamic function, and at the same time, it must return a cached data. It must return a cached data. That is for a route to be purely static. So here you can say, let's say dynamic function here, and static and cached data. Yes. Let's just say this is equals to static rendering. Now, what about a case where you have, if you have dynamic function here, let's say dynamic function, and data here is not cached. See, let's say not cached data. Therefore, here is going to be dynamically rendered. Here, this is going to be dynamic rendering. So also, if you have a date, let me just duplicate this. I'm giving you these edge cases to know when you should cache your data and when you should use dynamic functions in your application, so that you know exactly when your route is going to be dynamically rendered. So if you have if you do not have, let's say, no dynamic functions and no cache data, is going to be dynamically rendered as well. And the last case here is if you have no dynamic function and cached data, and cache data is also going to be dynamically rendered. So you see that for a function to be actually statically rendered, that route must not contain a dynamic function or cache data. So I said that I hope this explanation really tells it here. So for that now, what we're going to do is this get last 5 orders. We want this function here. We want this to be dynamic here. This data, this component here. Let's say we're just going to call our no store here. So if you call no store here inside this function like this, it's going to, this data is not going to be cached again. Therefore, here is going to, the whole of this component, our home page is going to be dynamically rendered. And the same for user. We can leave the users here like this because we have only 4 users and we are not going to be adding other users here. So you can leave the users like this. This user data now is going to be cached. It's going to be cached, but that doesn't change the fact that our dashboard is going to be dynamically rendered. I hope you understand that. So let's come to cache this chat data. Chat data also, we want to make it, we don't want to cache it. So let's say no store. And also we come to get card data. Our get card data also, let's just put no store here. So with this now, all of this here, this component here is going to be dynamically rendered. Okay, I know this is a lot to take in, but just think about it. So talking about client components, if we go back to our other charts here, you see that we are making this other chart a client component by opting in with this attribute here, this use client here. Now this is a client component. That means we cannot use that means we can use a use effect here now. Also, we can do a lot of things here now. All the client stuff which we want to do, we can do it here now. Remember, I said some few minutes ago that when you import a third-party component into your application, when you are using server components, you need to wrap that third-party component in your own client component before you import it into a server component. If you don't do that, it's going to throw you an error. So remember, I said that. So let's see how let's see what we can do in that situation. Let me just show you this. You don't need to code this with me. You can just observe, or if you want to code it, then that's good and fine. But if you want to code this section with me, you need to install this third-party component here. Let me show you. Let's go to package.json. I installed this pure React carousel. This pure React carousel here, it works with TypeScript. You don't need to install type definitions for it. You have pure React carousel. So you can install it if you want to follow this section with me. This package is not going to end up in our application, so I'm going to remove it later. So that's why I said you must not code along with me with this in this particular section here. Now, so with that said, what I want to do is I will go to, let me go to components here. I'm going to create a new file. I'll call this client. Let's say client dash component .cxs rfce yes, client component. I'll just say client component. Okay, I'm just creating this client component like this for now. Now what I want to do is I want to first come to let's go to pages, to orders here on, let's go to the order page here. This is where I want to bring in that third-party component in this order page, because this order page here is a server component, right? It's a server component. We are not writing any use client up here, so this is a server component. Now I just want to import that that package here, that component library here. It's a third-party component library, so I want to import it here directly into this server action. So what will happen is that it's going to be executed directly inside this server action. So here I will say import carousel provider. That's the first thing we're going to import from here, carousel provider. I'll also import slider. I'll also import slide for each of the slide. I'll import the button to go back, button back, and I'll also import button front, but okay, button back and button. This is button next, not button first. Yes, button next. Okay, like this. Now I just want to import this carousel in here. Say that this is going to be what's a carousel provider, and we have a slider here. But inside this carousel provider, we need to provide some options here. And the first is going to be natural slide width height. I'll set the natural slide height here to 125, and natural slide width, I'll send it to 100. And it also has one last required prop. We have the total slide is 3. So with all this, I'll just give a class name here also, class name with the height of let's say I'll give a height of 700 pixels here. So I'll also give some class names here too for these slides. We have 4 slides here, so I'm going to put 4 here instead of yes. So I just want to put some class names here. Class names here, I'll just say background. The first here is going to be indigo 300, and here this is going to be red, this is going to be green, and this is going to be yellow. So with this, since we are importing this directly inside this orders component here, which is actually a server component. So this carousel provider here is going to be evaluated as part of this client, as part of the server code. And this carousel component is using state in order to track the current slide which we are currently on. So, and state is not something that's been available on the server action. As I told you before, server action, they do not change. So with that now, you see that we're going to try to re-render server actions, and it's not going to work. So it's going to throw us an error. So let's check this out. Let's come to the browser. Okay, we are here. This is create order. Let's come to orders here. Okay, let's try to refresh this. Yes, you see a server error here. Super expression must either be null or a function. Now, this is just one of the errors which is going to be thrown on the server here. You see, now this is not going to work, as I told you before. So how can we make this work? Like I said, the solution is to wrap that component, that third-party component, that carousel in your own client component. Then you can import now that client component inside. You can import that client component now inside that server component. So let's go and see just that. So all of this component, we are going to wrap it inside our own component, this carousel provider here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll just cut this our own component, this client component. That's what I'm going to be using. So I'll cut all of this imports here, Control X. I'll bring it inside this client component. This actually now is not yet a client component, so we need to make it a client component here by setting use client here. Okay, now this is a client component, so I'll just give another div here. This is where I'm going to be wrapping everything. So now let's come back to this page. Let's cut this third-party component here. I'll cut this third-party component. So Control X. I'll cut this and I'll bring this third-party component here to this here, and I'll paste it here. So like this, now we are wrapping the third-party component inside our own client component here. We are wrapping this carousel provider inside our own component. Now if you import now our own component in here, let's say third client component here. Now it's going to work. Let's check. Yes, you see, now it's working as expected. So let's go and check. Let's go back to our slide. So here, this is the point we are just from checking. You need to wrap third-party components that rely on client-only features in your own client components. So whenever you import a third-party client component, wrap it in your own client component. So now what I want to also check again is this here, that you cannot import a server component into a client component module, since it will require a new request back to the server. So let's check this point here. Let's go back to the code. So if you come to this client component, I'm going to remove everything from here. I'll just say this is going to be client component here. Okay, now you can remove this carousel here. Also, if you come to our page, order page here, okay, we have the order component here. Okay, nice. Now what I want to do is I want to instead import, remove this. What I want to do is I want to import one of our components here. Let's say our dash users here. Let's say dash users. Yes. Since this component is being imported directly into this client component here, it's going to throw us an error. Why? Because we are fetching data into this component, and you cannot fetch data directly into a client component here like this. So when this code runs, this component is going to be evaluated as part of this client component module. So which is not all right, which is not okay, because we are going to try to call that is fetch data from this client component inside this client component, which is something Next.js cannot do. So it's going to throw us an error. So let's check. Let's go back to here. Okay, you see, immediately we see a runtime error here. Async await is not yet supported in client component, only server components. This error is often caused by accidentally adding used client into a module that was originally written for the server. So you see, we run into this error here. So in order to fix this, as I told you the solution already, what you need to do is, for this client component, you can just bring in, you pass it as prop. You need to pass down this dash users as prop here. So here, I'll just say children. You can call this anything you want. So children, and here the children is going to be of type React Node. And here you remove this dash users, and you just pass the children here. Now, I'm going to remove this. If we come now to our page here, we need to change the way we are calling this use client here, this client component here. And now here we need to pass in our dash users. Dash users. So now what is happening here is that this dash users is going to be running now on its own on the server. So we are just passing it as prop to this client component here, but it is not going to be built as part of client component module here. So let's go, let's check. Yes, you see, we have our dash users now here. So you see, this is working as expected. So this is going to be built separately from that client module. So let's go back to the slide. So make sure these are the main things which I've come up which you can follow when you're working with server components. So make sure you keep these rules at the back of your brain when you're working with server components. Now, with that said, with that said, here, let's give a recap over server components and client components. So on server components, what you can do with server components, you have data fetching. You can fetch data. If you're doing operation that needs you to fetch data, just fetch it in server components. That is, if you need to access some backend resources like your database, yes, you can use server components. If you need to keep sensitive information on the server, like your API keys, use server components. If you want to keep large dependencies, yes, you can do it on the server. If you want to reduce like your JavaScript client module, you can then keep your large dependencies on the server. That's what I meant here. Now, coming on the client, if you want to add like interactivity and event listeners like on click and on change, then client component is what you should be going for. And the ability to use state and use effect, if you want to use it, then it is client component you need to use. Also, if you need to use browsers only API like geolocation and local storage, etc., you can also use the client component here. So the last one is if you need to use custom hooks that depend on state and use effects, then client component is your go-to. So this is all I had to show you on rendering. There is more. You can take a look at rendering under the hood. If you go to the Next.js documentation, you're going to find that there. Now, let us turn our attention towards streaming. So what is streaming? Streaming is simply it's a data fetching technique that you can use to render your components as those components become ready. Especially when you're fetching data in those components, you have to you can stream them as the data is being fetched. So let's go and see what rendering is by checking at the Next.js documentation. We'll come here. Let's go. Okay, this is data fetching. We have streaming here. Streaming and suspense are React features that allows you to progressively render and incrementally stream rendered units of the UI to the client. With server component and nested layouts, you're able to instantly render parts of their page that do not specifically require data and show a loading state for parts of the page that are fetching data. So what this simply means is that if you have your static pages, you can just show the static pages, while on the pages where you're fetching data, you can then stream the content by showing a loading state. So that is what streaming is all about. So if you come here, you see these are some examples here. These are some examples of streaming. You see that this component, as they become ready, it's been streamed here into the UI there. So streaming allows you to break down the page HTML into smaller chunks and progressively send those chunks from the server to the client. This enables parts of the page to be displayed sooner without waiting for all the data to load before any UI can be rendered. So you see that is streaming. We have streaming, server rendering, and selective hydration. Okay, this is just a process here of streaming. So this is how you will do it. You wrap everything in this suspense component here, and you provide a fallback. This is for streaming. And for loading, you can use the loading.txs file here, a special file provided by Next.js. You have loading.ts. It helps you create meaningful loading UI with React suspense. So this loading.ts file here is using the React suspense API. So we are going to look at this right now. We're going to look at streaming now. So let's go and check in our application, because from this page here, you see that there are two ways in which we can stream in Next.js. We can use the loading.js file, or we can use the suspend component in order to stream our components. So with the loading.js file, you can stream the whole page, while with the suspense component, you can stream individual components as those components become ready. So that is just the little distinction I can give you here, because if you look here, we are streaming this whole component here. This is it. That means if you have like one component that is taking a long time to load, it's going to wait for that component before it can display the data. But with streaming here, with suspend here, let's do a suspend. Okay, with suspend here, if this component is taking a long time, this other component can render while this one is still waiting. You can see the content of this one, you can see the content of this one, while this other one is still loading. But for this loading.js, all these other components are going to wait until this other one finish before the content can now be displayed on the web page. So I think that's just the difference between the loading.js and the suspense component. So let's go and see this in action in our application. So to begin this section, I've created another file called skeletons. Now this skeleton files, it contains some skeletons for our application. Here we have the order detail skeleton. This is for our chat section. We have the cat skeleton, we have the cat wrapper skeleton, and then we have the latest order table skeleton. We have latest order mobile. This is the mobile skeleton section. So you see that we have skeletons for each of the sections we have in our application, and this is the skeleton for the dashboard in general. So with this, we have all the skeletons here. I'm not going to be writing these skeletons here with you, so I advise you to get the skeletons from the GitHub repository. I've attached links to that repository down in the description of this video. So you make sure you check it out and copy this code from there. To implement streaming, let's start with the loading.js file. But since we are using TypeScript, we are going to use but loading.tx, but actually txs, because you can also use txs in that file. So here in the dashboard, it has to be in this dashboard folder here. I'll create a new file. I'll call it loading.txs like this. rfce to scaffold a new component for us, and here I'll just replace this with loading like this, and now I'll just remove this loading and I replace my dashboard loading indicator. So I'll say dashboard skeleton. Okay, just like this, we have the loading skeleton for our application. Now let's go and check. I'll try to refresh the page. I don't know if you saw that, but it was very fast. So because we are on a high, my internet connection is kind of fast. So let me refresh it again. You see, yes, you see, if you look very carefully, you see it. Now what I want to do is I want to slow down this component here. Like I told you before, that if one of our components is slow, all the other components are going to wait for that data to finish fetching from that component before it can display our actual content. It's going to wait. It's going to show us that load indicator until that content is finished fetching. So let's go and try to manually slow down this latest order component. So let's go back to application. So what I'll do is I'll come to Prisma here. In this get last 5 orders, let's say I'll say await. Okay, this is it. New promised. We'll create a new promised here, and we'll pass this resolve, and we'll set timeout here to, I'll set the timeout to 6,000, which is actually 6 milliseconds here. So we're going to wait like for 6 seconds before we can show our content. So let's come back to the application. If you try to refresh now, yes, you see, if you look here, all of these components are going to wait for that 6 seconds. Okay, the 6 seconds is finished. Now you can see our data. So you see that if the component takes a much longer time, while these other components are faster, these other components are going to wait for this component to finish. So I hope that point there is well understood. So right now we have a bug here with the way we are loading our we are putting this loading indicator, because if we have another fetching functionality in this orders page here, what will happen is that it's going to reuse back the fetching the loading indicators here for this dashboard page, which is not something we want. So let me show you that effect. Yes, let me show you the effect rather than just telling you. So let's come back, let's come to our application. Let's go to open your dashboard, open this orders folder, go to page.txt here, and just import the latest order here, because if you import latest order, it's going to fetch the data for that latest order. That means we are fetching data now in this orders component. Now let's go back to the application. Now if you refresh this page, let's say okay, let's just go back to orders here. Let's refresh. You see we are still using the dashboard orders, but which is not supposed to be so. We're supposed to use only the loading indicator for this orders section here. So why is that happening? It's happening because the loading indicator is at the root. Our dashboard is the root folder for all of the other components. That means all the other components are inheriting that loading.txt file, because what will happen is that whenever there's a data fetching activity is going on, it's going to look for the closest loading.txt file which it has. Yes, you're going to look for the closest loading.txt file. When it finds that loading.txt file, it's going to display the skeleton for that loading.txt file. But our loading.txt file is right at the root folder here at the dashboard section. So let's go and see what we can do to change that. Now Next.js also provides us with something something they call route groups. Yes, route groups. That means you can group this dashboard into its separate routes, but this is not going to affect the way we are having our route segment. This is not going to affect our route segment. So what you can do is, let's create another folder inside this dashboard. Let's create another folder here, new folder, and let's call this overview. Now, the way Next.js does it is that if you just wrap this overview, if you wrap this overview in brackets like this. Yes, you need to wrap this overview in brackets like this. If you wrap this overview in bracket like this, now what will happen is that Next.js is going to skip this path, this overview path here, and it will render only this dashboard section. So let me show you. It's going to work back just the same, but is that we are not going to. Yes, it's going to treat this overview now like its own section under this dashboard here. So what I'll do is I'll just bring this speech.txs file inside this overview, and also bring this loading.css file inside this overview. Now the problem is solved. So remember, what is happening here is that Next.js is going to skip this overview in our route path. We are not going to have this overview in our route path. So if we go to /dashboard, we are still going to have this content. So the trick is that just put this bracket between the folder's name like this. So if you go back to your application, let's see, if you try to refresh now this section, you see it's going to wait. There's no loading indicator because we don't yet have a loading indicator for this. You see, yes, we have our content. Now if you come here, if you come back to the dashboard, yes, you see everything works fine for the dashboard. Now if you refresh, okay, it's still refreshing. Okay, everything is here now. Now if you try to go to /overview, it's going to give you an error because overview doesn't exist. This /overview is yes, it doesn't exist. So what happened is that we just grouped our application into route. Yes, in this folder here. So you can also use this technique to group your application into different sections. For example, you can, if you have an advertisement section in your application, you can group it into advertisement, marketing, and so on. So you can use that technique in order to group your app into different sections. Okay, with this, I think now you understand loading, that loading.txs file, the use of that loading.txs file. Now let us also check the suspense, the other one, suspense API. Let's check the suspense component, I mean to say. So let's go back here. Now that you know loading.txs, let's look at suspense. I'm going to remove that. I'll remove this here too, and I'm going to delete this loading because we are not going to need this loading in this. I'm going to stream these components here. I'm going to delete that. Okay, yes. Okay, now we saw that with suspense, you can just wrap the component which you want here with a suspense function, with a suspense component like this, and you provide a fallback here and here. No, this is suspense like this. Now this here, we have a loading skeleton for this latest orders. So I'm just going to say latest order skeleton. Okay, that is it. And now we have once you wrap the suspense with this component with the suspense keyword, is going to load our content. It's going to split our content into this component, and it's going to render this component based on what we are fetching here. So the next, also this dashboard users, I'm going to do the same thing for the dashboard users here, and suspense. I'll remove this one. Okay, coming to chat here, the same thing, suspense. Okay, we also have one left here, this card. Are we going to be streaming these individual cards? Yes, you could do that, but the thing is that we are going to have these cards appearing on the UI. in a disorder manner, which might not be good for the user's eyes. So what we're going to do is we are going to wrap this cart in another component. We call it cart wrapper, and then we are going to stream that cart wrapper component. So instead of streaming them individually, so that is what we are going to do here. We are having an error here. Let's try to fix this error before we go. Okay, we have a div here, which the div is not matching here, so I'm going to remove this one. Okay, that totally messed it up. Okay, I think it's fine now, but we don't actually need this div here. I'm going to remove this like this. Okay, this is fine now. Okay, let's go to a cart. Let's go into this cart folder here. I'm going to create, for this, I'm going to create another component down here. I'll say export const cart wrapper here. This cart wrapper component here. Oh, what is this? Here, I'm just going to return an empty React fragment like this, and I'll cut everything we have here. I'll cut all of this. I'm going to cut all of this because this is everything we need. And I'll bring it to the cart here. I'll paste it here. Okay, we have this data missing. I'm also going to cut this data from up here. Control X. I'll remove it from here. Let's go back here, and I'm going to paste it up here. Now I'll bring this, and I just have to make this an asynchronous method. Asynchronous function, sorry. Now everything is working. Now we are going to wrap this cart wrapper in a suspense component. So let's come to page here. Okay, this is where we have our cart. Now we can just say suspense. We fall back. And here we are just going to say cart wrapper like this. Now we need its own loading. It has its own loading indicator. So I'll just say cart wrapper skeleton. So okay, now with this, we are now streaming all of the dashboard. We are now streaming all of the dashboard content. Let's go check it out. Let's try to refresh. Okay, you see what I was telling you about? All this data have appeared, but this one is still loading. That's the advantage of using the suspense component with Next.js. So let's refresh again. Actually, it's coming from React. So you have this component appear. This is already coming, but this is still loading because it takes 6 seconds to load. But we can still see the other components. So that is the work of suspense. Now with this, I think we are done with this section. Now in the next section, we are going to add our orders page. This orders page here, we're going to add it in the next section. And in this orders page, we'll be able to do pagination. We're able to do search. We'll be able to search for orders. We're also going to filter the orders, and we're also going to sort the orders. So there is a lot to do in that section.